the people minus the indigenous people, the blacks and women at that time. So it was an imperfect vision. But given its time in history, it was a miracle that America was founded at all. And actually the American Revolution was won because both the aristocratic and the very powered people, the white male property owners, and the common people all joined forces, in a sense. They all saw that their common interest was one. They had been unified, even if it was just around one issue, which was to be freed from Great Britain 235 years ago. But it's what I call the grain of salt. And America has lost its grain of salt. Back in the Gandhian days, India was united through Gandhi with one grain of salt. He found the unifying principle, one grain of salt, to unify India, to finally throw out the British again in India. And America has to find its grain of salt too, which is that which unites us, not that which divides us. Because again, we're looking around and we're seeing problems everywhere. That's a state of mind, seeing problems. Well, it's also seeing separation is part of the perceptual framework that we have inherited. It's looking and seeing differences. It's all about differences, problems and differences, the ways that we're separate, the way that we're different. And in politics in particular, we are very, very divisive in these times. And the media is very divisive as well. And so there's an old adage about power and power structures, which is divide and conquer. It's always been the same game. How does a very, very small group of people rule a large group of people? How does that occur? There's only one way that can occur, and that is by engineering divide and conquer strategies whereby we, the people, divide ourselves against each other, and therefore we are conquered. And who has done the conquering? We have done the conquering. It has been us, divided against each other, whether it's by race or by sex or by politics or Democrats or Republicans or issues ad infinitum. And so part of the vision for a new America has to embody a unifying principle, a way that we can see what we have in common as people. That's just the most basic agreement fields that we can come up with. Not something very complicated. People are not very complicated when it comes right down to it. We're very simple creatures. But we've made things very, very complicated. And we have divided ourselves against each other, and thus the power structure continues to rule and to plunder, because ultimately we have consented to be governed and to be divided. So part of that vision is finding that grain of salt and finding ways that we can unify ourselves and work together and to organize, much like what we're seeing on the streets. It's actually miraculous what is happening out on there in the streets. I know we're seeing the news, and the news is showing one side of it, which is violence and the people that are getting beat up and all the other kind of stuff. But you're not seeing the organizing that's actually going on behind these things. It's actually quite awesome. The general assemblies that are being formed, the one in Oakland, California in particular, they have thousands and thousands of people using a consensus process with megaphones to be able to come up with certain things. What do they want, you know? And the process, it's the process that's important. How we communicate, how do we process what we want? And that's an exercise in direct democracy. And we have a representative democracy system, which is we elect people, Republicans and Democrats, and we get the same old stuff. No matter who gets elected, everything gets worse. And, you know, so an exercise of direct democracy is pretty profound. So how do we make decisions and such? So I'm going to come back, and I'm going to jump around just a little bit. But the agenda for tonight was the vision for a new America, and beginning with going into depth around sovereignty for all the people, which has been a principle that has been a guiding light for my life, even before I knew what sovereignty meant, even before I knew the word. Because when I started teaching 20-some years ago, I would have a group of people like this, and no one had ever heard the word before. It wasn't even in the conversation. It had been so obliterated, except in reference to the King or the Queen of England or indigenous people. Sovereignty did not be part of the conversation. So let me define sovereignty from two different points of view. First, as I said earlier, from an internal perspective. I have to embody sovereignty internally to be sovereign, to become sovereign. It isn't something I do out there. It's not paperwork that I fill out. It's not documentation. It's not me going out there and talking about it. It's about me becoming sovereign. And that's a much longer road than just simply, signing my name on a declaration and declaring that I'm legally sovereign. So the way I've been teaching it for 20 years now is that sovereignty, there's 7 different aspects of sovereignty, and to be fully sovereign, we have to become all 7. 4 of them are internal and 3 of them are external. We tend to focus on the external. It's part of our habitual conditioning, where the work that needs to be done is internally. So I have to be physically sovereign, health and wellness. I have to be in good physical shape. I have to be responsible for my physical health and well-being. Second, I have to be emotionally sovereign, which means I have to own my power, my emotions, my anger, my love. Everything has to be owned and be responsible for that. That's emotional sovereignty, and we get stuck there. We like to project a lot of anger out there, and we like to go out and say, well, those are the bad guys that are out there. It's the government. It's the government, right? It's the government's fault that we are in this predicament. Well, a sovereign takes full responsibility for creating their own realities and also their own experience. And if we were to be fully responsible, then external authority would shift. But not until we are responsible as the governed, because we have abrogated our power. We have accepted victimhood. We have accepted that, oh, we're victims, and we've identified with that. And once we identify with it, then we're stuck. We are conquered. We are governed. We are subjects. So we have to be physically sovereign, emotionally sovereign, and mentally sovereign. That's 3. Which means we have to be responsible for our mental environment. What you take in there, what you believe, has to be re-examined right to its core. Because when we were newborn babies, and we came out fresh into the world, we didn't have any belief systems. We were a clean palate. And granted, we all grow up and we get conditioned and we learn from our environment and our teachers and our parents and our schools and the church and the media. We bring all of this stuff into our mental environment, and that becomes who we think we are. Becomes our identity. And a lot of that is not relevant to being sovereign. And a lot of it's counterproductive. A lot of it is talking one way, oh, I want to be sovereign, but on the other hand, you're saying, oh, I'm no good, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm a victim or something. So, be responsible for your physical, your emotional, and your mental sovereignty. That's 3, and the 4th is spiritual. And whatever you consider to be your spiritual sovereignty or your direct personal relationship with the divine or with the Creator or with God or with Source, that is the 4th internal aspect. And if you master those 4, you're an unstoppable force of creation. And you can do anything, be anything, nothing and nobody out there is going to stop you.
You!
And so that's the beginning. That's the platform. If I have anything, any wisdom over 20 years of teaching, it's that. Lay the foundations. Don't build your house in the sky. Lay a foundation first. Have a plan. Like an architect would have a plan, and you would build a foundation in your house. Well, you are a house. Your life is a house. Your family's a house. Your community's a house. Austin, the nation, is just another level of it. And if we want it to change at a national level, then we darn well better change it right here and start making those shifts in consciousness which are required to fully embody sovereignty in all of the 4 internal aspects. And then once you've got that foundation laid, then legal sovereignty. What can you do to extract yourself from the citizenship, the jurisdictions, and everything else that have a chain around your neck? Second, the economic sovereignty. How can you be economically sovereign when not codependent, dependent on the banks, dependent on the government, dependent on welfare? If we're not economically sovereign, we're not sovereign either. And then finally, the last little icing on the cake is the political sovereignty. We want America to